Today's episode is brought to you by Mazars.
SoundCartel.
From SoundCartel, I'm Nicole Goodman, and this is Business Essentials Daily. The tax office turned human during the pandemic, offering repayment breaks to struggling small businesses. But now COVID is behind us, the ATO has started sending out demands. For some, it all seems too much. But who do you turn to for help? Sandra Blake says you should start by picking up the phone and calling the free Small Business Debt Helpline. Sandra's a financial counsellor for the service and is explaining the debt situation to Jeff Waters.
Well, the small business owners that we're speaking to on the Small Business Debt Helpline are feeling very low. Their mood is extremely sad. We're often getting tears. They're suffering from cash flow issues. They're unable to service their debts, quite commonly loans, ATO, commercial rent. They may have a personal guarantee that they're not aware of that existence or the implications of that. They don't know if they're viable or unable to continue. Some of them, they know that they're not viable and that their option is to liquidate, and they can't afford to do that because, of course, that costs money. And sometimes when we're speaking to people, we tell them the most viable option for them is to close the business. So we talk about respectful exits, how they can walk away from their business with their head held high and look to their future. We think respectful exit's a very important part of what we do.
We'll drill down to that in a moment, but before we do, we're hearing from the politicians and from the economists and certainly from the Reserve Bank that spending has been quite high, and that's why it's said to be fueling inflation, and that's why the RBA has increased interest rates. Do you not agree with that?
Well, we're hearing from our clients more recently that consumer spending is starting to back off, and that's affecting their businesses. They're the retail businesses that we're speaking to. They're noticing that now.
All right. So if I call you, or if a listener calls you in distress, how can you possibly help them?
Well, we are very good negotiators, so we can advocate for them where they're not able to or where they haven't had success in negotiating with a lender or with the ATO. Most of the callers who call us have an ATO debt. I would say 90% or more have an ATO debt, because during COVID, the ATO were quite lenient on collections. Moratoriums were granted, and of course this had to come to an end. But now they're repaying those deferred payments, while at the same time trying to keep up with their current liabilities. So we explain to that client the ATO debt hardship options, and we help the caller prepare for their negotiations with the ATO. Now that might be how to complete a statement of financial position, and that would ascertain and demonstrate to the ATO what they can afford to offer in a repayment plan, an amount that's going to be sustainable, because we don't want that person to commit to a payment plan that they're not going to be able to keep up to. That's not doing anybody any favours. And also, if needed, we can actually join that person on a three-way call with the ATO and help them in that negotiation. People find that quite helpful. We know the best phone numbers to phone at the ATO to get to where you have to get to, and that can be quite useful as well.
You're making the tax office sound human here, Sandra.
Oh, they are actually. And don't people dread the ATO and, having a debt with the ATO? It's quite scary. But look, we've found they are humans on the other end, and we've found that with negotiation, they usually want their debts repaid in 2 years. Sometimes that's not possible for our clients. The ATO will sometimes extend that to 3 years with negotiation. Again, sometimes that's not possible for our clients either. But We do work with the client and the ATO to work out something that's going to be hopefully lead to a path out of the current situation that the client is in.
And are there any costs involved to the client of yours?
Not with us, no. We're always totally free. So financial counselling is a free service. We're not for profit. We're all qualified. So I think sometimes when people hear that we're a free service, they think, oh, maybe they're volunteers or something. No, we're paid. So we're not for profit. We do get government grants to support us. And most of the small business financial counsellors can actually walk in the shoes of the small business owners because we've owned our own businesses ourselves. And that's been my case and currently still do. So that's really useful, I think, when we're dealing with the client. We've got lived experience and we're confidential, totally confidential. Another fear that some people have is that, oh gosh, if I tell them what all my problems, that'll get back to the ATO or, something like that. But it is confidential what is told to us and free, and we're all qualified. Impartial as well. So we're not going to, recommend you go and see a particular accountant or insolvency expert and then get a bit of a handout. It doesn't work like that either. We're very impartial.
Mazars have been a long-time supporter of SoundCartel, and now they're helping us bring you this podcast. To find out how Mazars can support your business, visit mazars.com.au. That's mazars.com.au.
So you've talked about negotiation and such, but what other sorts of guidance do you give?
We're able to refer. One of the problems that small business owners have, separate to consumers, is there is a real lack of assistance. Consumers, when they have debt problems and other problems, they can go to legal aid or community legal centre. It doesn't exist for a small business owner. And that's a particular problem because there are also lending protections for small business owners. And that's a real problem for many of our callers who have needed a cash injection or some type of funding to keep their business afloat or to purchase new equipment. So they've gone for a loan from their bank and they've been declined. And quite possibly they've been declined for very good reason. Lending is tight and their figures mightn't have looked that great. But then they're tempted to reach out to a non-mainstream lender. Now, of course, their interest rates are much higher. They're taking more risk. But unfortunately, we also see that they have fees that can only be described as egregious. And I can share an example if you want.
Please.
Yes, so a tradie I spoke to from a regional flood-affected area. And this was quite common, this type of issue. Tradies weren't directly impacted by flood, so the water didn't come into their warehouse things or shop, but it prevented them from completing jobs and they saw huge cancellation of work. So they weren't eligible for grants because they didn't suffer that direct flood damage. Anyway, this guy, he had taken out a loan prior to the flood from a non-mainstream lender, about 50K. He actually only wanted 20, but the lender said he could have 50, so why not?
Oh dear, oh dear.
We see that as well. And there's no responsible lending when it comes to small business owners, as there is with consumers. So when he called us, he'd fallen into arrears. He phoned the lender, stating that he was having trouble explaining what had happened. Work was cancelled, he'd been impacted by floods. No sympathy there, no hardship offered. His repayments were $850 a week, but because he was in arrears, he was being charged $90 a day, late fees, every day,
Oh,
$90.
my word.
And we see that regularly, and even though his contract was for weekly payments, you get those daily late fees. When he phoned us, this lender had given him a week to pay up before they'd commence legal action. They're very quick, these lenders, to place a caveat on a property. Now, this guy contacted his bank, one of the big four, who he had a mortgage with. He thought, I'll access some equity in my home and pay it out that way. But the bank wouldn't refinance until the arrears with the business lender were caught up, and he demonstrated 1 or 2 months without missing repayments. So it was a real catch-22. So what were we able to do? We can negotiate with that business lender, and we can get some time. We can often get time. Quite often these small business loaners aren't members of AFCA, that's the Australian Financial Complaints Authority, the relevant ombudsman. They don't have to be. So that can make negotiations even more tricky. But we do have that negotiation ability to be able to talk to them, and it might be saying, well, look, if these guys are going to go bankrupt, you're not going to be getting anything, so cut us some slack, give him some time. He's committing to this, and please work with us, and we can try to negotiate.
Now, you mentioned earlier walking away with dignity, and if the worst case scenario happens and we decide that my business is not viable, what do you mean by walking away with dignity?
Look, people have invested their heart and soul as well as all their finances into their business. They've worked long hours, blood, sweat and tears. They've been encouraged quite often to chase their dream. Perhaps they weren't encouraged to do a business course. Perhaps they've been affected by a natural disaster, COVID, no fault of their own. But there is light at the end of the tunnel. For example, they may want to relocate, reinvent themselves. Now, there are a lot of free courses on offer at TAFE at the moment. We talk about that. Perhaps they're ready to retire. Some of the people we speak to, they've had their own small business all their life. And I find it quite sad that they get to the end and there's nothing there for them. Those people, we explain what there is for them in regards to Centrelink. And that's daunting. These people have never been to Centrelink before in their life, and what that process looks like and how they can be supported. For other people, it's perhaps seeing a business advisor, trying to change their business model. Perhaps that can be changed somehow, going into something else. We discuss a whole range of options with them to give them something to look forward to. And mental health is such a big part of this. So what we find is, after speaking with us, there's a great relief from the client. They know they have options, and we're looking out for their mental health the whole time. We're able to refer on. We're not therapeutic counsellors, but we have had training in mental health first aid. We hear time and time again from our clients how valuable that listening ear is, because small business owners, they haven't been used to having that service, that free service. We can talk to them again and again if that's what they're needing.
Sandra, it sounds like you are an angel from heaven, and I can hear the listeners lining up now wanting to talk to you. How do we get in touch with you?
We've got a 1-800. It's 1-800-413-828. We've also got a web, we're sbdh.org.au. That stands for Small Business Debt Helpline. We've also got a chat portal. Some people prefer to chat. They might find that they're a little more anonymous that way. They can hide behind the veil of their voice and chat, or there's all sorts of reasons people might prefer chat. But you'll be answered by a small business financial counsellor. There's no intake. We'll take your query. We'll speak to you straight away during business hours. And we're right around Australia, but somebody might phone in and I'll answer. I'm in regional Victoria and I might speak to somebody in WA or Tasmania. And we've got small business financial counsellors around Australia, but we're all the one team.
That was Sandra Blake, financial counsellor for the Small Business Debt Helpline. This episode of Business Essentials Daily is produced by the team at SoundCartel. Thanks for listening. I'm Nicole Goodman. We'll bring you more Be Daily tomorrow. Follow @BE Daily Podcast across social media and head to bedaily.com.au for more from the Business Essentials Daily podcast. SoundCartel. This episode was brought to you by Mazars. To find out more, visit mazars.com.au. That's mazars.com.au.